The night was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that presses down on the soul, making every breath feel like a sin. The old Wainwright estate stood at the edge of the countryside, a vast and brooding mansion wrapped in ivy and shadows. Its stone walls had witnessed more than they should have, absorbing the cries, the whispers, and the secrets of generations who dared to live within. Tonight, though, the house seemed almost alive, as though it knew another confession was about to unfold within its walls. The sisters moved quietly through the dimly lit corridor, their bare feet brushing against the cold marble floor, their nightgowns whispering against their legs. They were young, beautiful, heirs to a fortune that most could only dream of. But their faces carried a hollowness, a strange weight that no youth should bear. Their eyes, wide and searching, darted nervously toward the heavy oak door at the end of the hallway. Behind that door was the man who had given them life, the same man who had stolen it away piece by piece. Their father, Jonathan Wainwright, was a man of immense wealth and even greater reputation, admired by society, envied by his peers, a name that carried weight in every ballroom and court. Yet behind the polished mask of respectability, behind the smiles and handshakes, lurked a hunger that could never be satisfied. He was a man who had turned his own bloodline into his darkest obsession. For outsiders, the Wainwright sisters were the picture of grace and privilege, often seen at lavish parties dressed in silks and jewels, their laughter echoing across candlelit halls. But when the music faded, when the guests left, and when the doors of the estate closed for the night, they were no longer daughters. They were possessions. They were ornaments in their father's twisted kingdom. Tonight was no different. As the younger sister hesitated at the door, her hand trembling above the iron handle, the older one whispered in her ear, her voice steady but broken. She had learned long ago that resistance was useless, that their father's grip was unrelenting, that his love was not the kind celebrated in poems, but the kind whispered about in horror. The girl's hand finally fell upon the handle, and the door creaked open with a groan that seemed to echo down the hall, like the house itself was mourning the fate of its own. Inside, the room was bathed in the glow of a single candle. There, father sat in a high-backed chair, a glass of brandy in his hand, his eyes fixed on them as though they were prey, wandering willingly into the predator's lair. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that chilled the air around them. He did not need to speak. His daughters knew why they were there. The older sister took the lead, stepping forward with a grace that had been forced into her bones. Her face calm, her voice soft, though her heart pounded with every step. She hated him. She hated the way he looked at them, the way he claimed them, the way he destroyed what should have been pure. Yet she had also learned something dangerous. She had learned to hide her hatred, to bury it beneath obedience because survival demanded silence. Her younger sister followed, tears glistening in her eyes, her body tense, her innocence already shattered long before this night. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish into the dark woods beyond the estate. But there was no escape. The Wainwright name was a prison, and their father was both the jailer and the executioner. Jonathan Wainwright's voice finally broke the silence, low and commanding, dripping with an authority that had once built empires and now destroyed souls. He spoke of loyalty, of family, of love, twisting sacred words into weapons that cut deeper than any blade. His daughters listened, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. In his presence, their will was stripped bare. Every glance, every gesture was a reminder of the power he held over them. As the candle flickered, casting monstrous shadows across the walls, the house seemed to breathe with them, absorbing the unholy ritual that was about to unfold once again. The younger sister shut her eyes, wishing herself elsewhere, while the elder remained still, her mind drifting to a future she could not yet see. A day when perhaps the Wainwright curse would end. But for now, there was no freedom, no savior, no escape. Only silence, obedience, and the suffocating presence of the man who had turned fatherhood into a crime. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the sound of something ancient and cursed. The estate stood like a tomb, sealing in its horrors, guarding its secrets from a world that would never believe the truth. And as the night deepened, the sisters disappeared into their father's shadow once more, their identities dissolving into the darkness, leaving behind only the haunting echo of innocence lost. The morning sun broke through the curtains of the Wainwright estate, but even daylight could not cleanse the sins buried within its walls. The mansion looked grand from the outside, a beacon of wealth and privilege, its gardens manicured, its fountains glittering in the light. Servants moved quietly about their duties, polishing silver, tending to horses, arranging fresh flowers in the halls. To the world, nothing seemed amiss. Yet to the sisters, every sunrise was not a beginning, but a continuation of a nightmare that refused to end. They sat at the long mahogany dining table, a meal spread before them like a feast, though neither had any appetite. Their father sat at the head, the master of the house, his posture straight, his eyes sharp, his presence suffocating. He carried himself with the authority of a man who believed he owned not just land and fortune, but the very lives of those around him. His daughters did not eat. They merely pushed the food around their plates, their thoughts trapped in the shadows of the night before. He spoke casually, asking about their plans for the day, commenting on the estate, discussing business as though the horrors of the night had never happened. His tone was calm, almost fatherly, but beneath each word was a quiet reminder of his control. He was a man who could command nations of wealth, and yet he chose to command his own daughters instead. The elder sister forced a smile when he addressed her, her training impeccable, her performance flawless. She had learned to wear masks, to act the part of the perfect daughter, the obedient heiress, because to falter would mean punishment, shame, or worse. The younger sister, however, could not hide so well. Her eyes betrayed her, her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. Their father noticed, of course. He noticed everything. His gaze lingered on her for just a moment, too long, his smile curling at the edges, a silent message that froze her blood. After breakfast, the sisters walked together through the gardens, their voices hushed, their steps hurried. The elder tried to comfort the younger, reminding her to stay strong, to endure, to survive. But survival came at a cost. Every day they lived under his roof, a part of them withered. They were not free, not in body, not in mind, and certainly not in soul. The younger sister whispered that she could not bear it any longer, that she wanted to escape, to run far away where their father's reach could not follow. The elder knew better. The world outside saw Jonathan Wainwright as a man of impeccable reputation, a philanthropist, a businessman, a father of grace. Who would believe the words of two daughters against such a man? Their cries would be dismissed as hysteria, their reputations ruined, their names forever stained. The Wainwright name was both their inheritance and their curse. Later that afternoon, visitors arrived at the estate. Wealthy businessmen, polished gentlemen, and elegantly dressed ladies filled the grand halls, their laughter echoing against the high ceilings. The sisters were dressed in gowns of silk and lace, their faces powdered, their hair styled, presented like dolls for the amusement of society. To the world, they were enviable figures of beauty and fortune, destined for powerful marriages, admired for their poise and charm. No one saw the fear in their eyes. No one noticed the way their smiles faltered when no one was looking. Their father moved among the guests with ease, shaking hands, raising glasses, delivering speeches that painted him as a man of virtue. His daughters stood by his side, silent ornaments in his performance, their very presence a testament to his false image of family honor. In the crowd was a young man, tall, refined, with kind eyes that lingered on the younger sister longer than propriety allowed. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as an object, not as property, but as a person. Their eyes met across the room and a spark of something dangerous flickered in her chest. Hope. The elder sister noticed it. Immediately, her heart clenching in both fear and longing. She knew that hope was dangerous, that any sign of rebellion, any crack in the facade, could bring their father's wrath upon them. Still, she could not stop her sister's gaze, nor could she deny the faint memory of what it felt like to dream of escape. As the evening wore on, the younger sister found herself in quiet conversation with the young man. He spoke gently, his words kind, his presence like a balm to her wounded soul. He admired her intelligence, her wit, the way she carried herself with quiet strength. For a moment, she forgot the chains that bound her, forgot the horrors of the night, forgot the weight of her father's eyes watching from across the room. But Jonathan Wainwright saw everything. His glass froze halfway to his lips as he watched his daughter laugh softly at something the young man had said. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, and in that moment, the mask of the gracious host slipped, if only for an instant. The elder sister felt the shift in the air. She knew that look, that storm brewing in their father's eyes, and her stomach turned to stone. The night ended with farewells, the guests leaving with praises on their lips for Jonathan's hospitality, never knowing the darkness that lurked behind the walls. The young man was among them, his departure marked by a lingering glance that promised something more. The younger sister clung to that look, that spark of hope, as though it were a lifeline. But when the doors closed and the laughter faded, the storm broke. Their father summoned them to his study, his voice calm, his words sharp as blades. He spoke of loyalty, of betrayal, of what it meant to dishonor the Wainwright name. His eyes locked on the younger sister, and she felt the world collapse around her. His anger was not loud, not explosive, but cold and measured, the kind of anger that left no room for escape. He reminded her of her place, of who she belonged to, of the bond that no outsider could ever break. The elder sister tried to intervene, her voice trembling, her words desperate, but he silenced her with a single glance. That night, the walls of the estate absorbed another secret, another wound, another scar upon the souls of the Wainwright sisters. The younger sister lay awake in her chamber, tears staining her pillow, her heart torn between despair and the faint, dangerous flicker of hope that refused to die. Somewhere in the darkness, she still held onto the memory of kind eyes and gentle words. And though her father's shadow loomed larger than ever, deep inside her a quiet rebellion began to stir, fragile but alive. The estate stood silent once. More, its halls filled with echoes of power, fear, and longing. Outside, the wind carried whispers of change, though the sisters could not yet know if it would bring freedom or destruction. The rain fell hard that night, beating against the windows of the Wainwright estate like a warning from the heavens. The sky was black, the air heavy, the storm raging as though it sought to wash the house clean of its sins. But nothing could purge what lingered inside those walls. The sisters sat together in the dim glow of their chamber, the younger clutching a shawl around her shoulders as though it could shield her from the chill that had settled deep inside her bones. The elder paced the room, her face pale, her eyes restless, her thoughts turning like blades in the dark. She had seen the way their father looked at her sister after the evening's events, and she knew that danger was coming. For Jonathan Wainwright, any hint of disobedience was unforgivable. To him, the sisters were not daughters but possessions, his treasures, his legacy twisted into flesh. And when a possession dared to show signs of rebellion, punishment was inevitable. The door creaked, opened suddenly, and a servant appeared, bowing low, his eyes downcast. He delivered the summons in a trembling voice. Their father wished to see them both in the library. The sisters exchanged a look, the younger's face blanching, the elder's jaw tightening with resolve. There was no choice. There never was. They followed the servant down the corridor, the storm outside rattling the windows as if urging them to run, though their steps only carried them deeper into the heart of their prison. The library was vast, lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and power. A fire roared in the hearth, but the warmth did nothing to ease the chill in the room. Their father sat in a high-backed chair, his figure imposing, a glass of brandy once again in his hand. His eyes, however, were cold as steel, fixed upon his daughters with a weight that pressed the breath from their lungs. He spoke softly, almost tenderly at first, asking his younger daughter about the man she had spoken to at the gathering. His words were smooth, measured, but beneath them lay the razor's edge of accusation. She stammered, her voice fragile, her hands trembling as she clutched the folds of her gown. She tried to deny it, to downplay the moment, but Jonathan Wainwright's gaze cut through every word. He knew. He always knew. The elder sister stepped forward, attempting to shield her, to take the blame, but their father silenced her with a glare that froze her in place. His calm turned to ice, his voice dropping lower, sharper, each word slicing through the silence like a whip. He spoke of betrayal, of disobedience, of how his daughters belonged to him and him alone. He reminded them that they were not free, that their lives, their futures, even their very thoughts were bound to his will. Then, with a suddenness that made the younger sister flinch, he hurled the glass of brandy into the fire. Flames flared. Violently, shadows dancing across the walls like specters of damnation. He rose from his chair, towering over them, his presence suffocating. The younger sister's knees buckled beneath the weight of his fury, but the elder steadied her, holding her upright even as her own body trembled. Jonathan stepped closer, his hand brushing against his younger daughter's face in a mockery of tenderness. His touch burned, a reminder that there was no escape, that her life was tethered to his darkness. The elder sister's heart pounded, every muscle in her body screaming to act, to tear her sister away, but fear held her frozen. The pow. Storm outside raged louder, thunder shaking the estate, lightning flashing across the tall windows. In that light, for a moment, Jonathan's face looked less like a man's and more like something monstrous, a demon wrapped in human skin. The younger sister's tears spilled, silent and desperate, as she whispered a plea for mercy. But mercy was not something Jonathan Wainwright knew. He turned his wrath into words, lecturing them about loyalty, about purity, about the sacred bond of family twisted into his own perverse creed. Each sentence was a chain, binding them tighter to his will. At last, he dismissed them, his voice calm again, though the threat lingered heavy in the air. The sisters retreated to their chamber, their steps unsteady, their hearts broken further than before. Once inside, the younger collapsed onto her bed, sobs shaking her fragile frame. The elder knelt beside her, holding her close, whispering promises she could not keep. She told her sister to be strong, that they would endure, that one day this would end. But in her own heart, doubt festered. How long could they endure before they broke completely? That night, as the storm quieted and the estate settled into uneasy silence, the younger sister lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every cruel word, every threatening glance. Yet amidst the despair, she clung to the memory of the young man's kind eyes. It was dangerous, perhaps even fatal, but it was all she had. Hope had been planted within her, fragile yet alive, and no matter how tightly her father's grip closed around her, it refused to die. The elder sister, meanwhile, sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. She was not thinking of hope, not anymore. She was thinking of survival, of strategy, of how to outwit a man who believed himself untouchable. Somewhere deep within her, anger simmered hot and sharp. For years, she had obeyed, endured, played the role of the perfect daughter. But now she saw something else. A chance, however slim, to break the cycle, to protect her sister even if it cost her everything. She clenched her fists in the dark, her heart hardening with resolve. The estate slept, but within its walls two forces stirred. The younger clinging to a fragile hope of love, the elder steeling herself for war. And far down the corridor in the solitude of his study, Jonathan Wainwright sat alone by the fire, his mind consumed not by guilt, but by possession. He sipped his brandy slowly, his eyes reflecting the flames, as though already plotting the next move in a game only he could win. The storm outside had passed, but within the Wainwright house it had only just begun. The days that followed carried a strange stillness, like the calm before another storm. The Wainwright estate remained, a portrait of wealth and elegance to the outside world, its servants moving with quiet discipline, its halls echoing with the footsteps of privilege. But for the sisters, every corner of the house felt like a trap, every silence like the pause before a blow. They moved carefully, speaking little, their eyes always watching, always anticipating the shadow of their father's presence. He was everywhere, even when he was not in sight. His rules governed their breaths, his moods dictated the rhythm of their days, and his obsessions seeped into every part of their lives. The younger sister tried to hold on to her fragile hope, the memory of the young man's kindness burning faintly like a candle in her heart. She thought of his voice, his eyes, the way he had looked at her as though she was something more than a name or an object. But each time she dared to let that hope rise, her father's face appeared in her mind, crushing it with the weight of his gaze. She wondered if she would ever see the young man again, if fate would allow even a whisper of escape. The elder sister saw the hope in her eyes and felt both fear and sorrow. Hope, she knew, was dangerous. Hope made people reckless. And recklessness in the Wainwright house could be fatal. One evening their father announced that he would be hosting another gathering, this time a more intimate affair. Only a select few families, those of high status and greater wealth. The sisters knew what this meant. They would once again be displayed like treasures, paraded in front of potential suitors, all while their father pulled invisible strings. His wealth was immense, but his daughters were his greatest bargaining chips. The elder sister dressed carefully, painting her face with the composure of a perfect lady, though inside her stomach twisted with dread. The younger, though hesitant, allowed herself a flicker of hope. Perhaps the young man would return. Perhaps the universe would give her another chance to feel something other than fear. The night of the gathering came. Candlelight flickered across, crystal chandeliers, the air heavy with the scent of roses and expensive wine. Laughter and polite conversation filled the grand hall, a mask over the darkness hidden within. The sisters stood together, their gowns shimmering, their smiles delicate, their every movement watched by eyes that saw only beauty and fortune. The younger scanned the room, her heart skipping when she caught sight of him. The young man, from before. He was there, speaking with other guests, his presence as gentle and warm as she remembered. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting moment, the world seemed to stop. He smiled, small but unmistakable, and she felt her heart race in, a way she had long forgotten it could. The elder sister noticed immediately. She gripped her sister's hand lightly, a silent warning, but it was too late. The connection had been made, and hope had already taken root deeper than before. Throughout the evening, the young man found moments to draw near, to exchange small words that meant little to anyone else but everything to her. He spoke of art, of music, of things far removed from the suffocating world she lived in. And in his presence, she felt alive again, if only for minutes stolen between the watchful eyes of society. But Jonathan Wainwright watched. He did not show his hand, not yet. He smiled at his guests, raised his glass, engaged in conversation, but his mind was locked on the silent language passing between his daughter and the young man. He felt the spark of rebellion in her eyes, the possibility of disobedience rising against him, and his fury coiled tighter with every passing moment. To him, it was not love she was reaching for. It was treachery. The night ended with farewells, the guests departing into the cool darkness. Once again, the young man left her with a lingering look, one that promised more, one that whispered of escape. And once again, the sisters returned to the silence of the estate, their father's mask finally slipping the moment the doors closed. He summoned them with a voice low and calm, but beneath it was the rumble of thunder waiting to break. In the study, the air was thick, the fire snapping in the hearth as though it too sensed the storm brewing. Jonathan's eyes were dark, his smile gone, his words deliberate. He spoke of appearances, of reputation, of how a single glance, a single whisper could destroy everything he had built. He turned to his younger daughter, his voice soft but laced with venom, reminding her that her heart, her body, her very soul belonged to him, and no outsider could ever claim her. She stood frozen, tears burning her eyes, but the elder sister stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. She spoke of innocence, of misunderstanding, of how nothing improper had occurred. She tried to shield her sister once more, but her father's hand struck the desk with sudden violence, silencing her words. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot, making the younger flinch, her breath catching in her throat. Jonathan rose slowly, his presence filling the space like smoke, suffocating, inescapable. He moved toward them, his gaze fixed, his fury restrained but lethal. He reminded them again of loyalty, of obedience, of the sacred bond that he alone defined. His words were a curse, chaining them tighter to him, his shadow growing larger with every syllable. When at last he dismissed them, they left the study in silence, their bodies trembling, their hearts pounding with fear. The younger collapsed into sobs once they reached their chamber, but the elder remained quiet, her mind a storm of thoughts. That night, long after her sister had cried herself to sleep, the elder sat awake by the window, staring into the darkness beyond the estate. She thought of escape, of rebellion, of the dangerous spark that had ignited in her sister's heart. She knew that if it burned brighter, their father's wrath would consume them both. Yet she also knew something else. That spark might be their only chance at freedom. But freedom would not come easily. It would demand courage, sacrifice, perhaps even blood. Far away, the young man too lay awake, his thoughts restless, his heart troubled by the sadness he had seen in her eyes. He did not yet know the full weight of the chains that bound her, but he felt them. And somewhere deep inside he resolved that he would not let her suffer alone. The estate slept, but the darkness within was restless. A storm had begun, one that no wealth, no reputation, no mask could contain. And in the quiet of the night, the sisters' fates began to shift, bound not only by fear, but now by the faintest glimmer of rebellion. The air in the Wainwright estate grew heavier with each passing day, as though the walls themselves were suffocating under the weight of unspoken truths. The younger sister carried within her a dangerous secret, the seed of hope planted by a stranger's smile. Every glance she had stolen at the young man, every word they had shared, played over and over in her mind like a forbidden melody. She clung to it desperately, like a drowning soul to driftwood. Yet with each passing moment, the elder sister saw the danger mounting, the invisible thread tightening around them both. She knew their father's silence was not forgiveness. It was the gathering of a storm, Jonathan Wainwright was a man who calculated every move, and when he struck, it was with precision. One evening, as the sisters sat in their chamber, a folded note appeared at the base of their door. Their breath caught at the sight of it, for no one dared to break the invisible seal of their father's authority. The elder snatched it up quickly, her hands trembling as she unfolded the parchment. The handwriting was unfamiliar yet elegant. It was from him, the young man. He had found a way to send a message, brief but powerful. He wrote of her eyes, of her sorrow, of his desire to see her again, to speak freely, to know her heart. He promised discretion, but more than that, he promised understanding. The younger sister pressed the note to her chest, her eyes filling with tears, the spark within her blazing brighter. The elder tried to take it from her, warning her of the peril, begging her to see reason. But the younger's lips curved into a smile the elder had not seen in years, a smile both heartbreaking and beautiful. It was a glimpse of who she once was, before their father's shadow had devoured her. The elder's heart ached, torn between fear and love. She wanted to protect her sister from the world and from their father, but how could she extinguish the only flame that kept her alive? The nights grew restless. The younger began to dream again, to whisper of escape, of a life beyond the gilded prison of the estate. She imagined walking in sunlight without fear, laughing without shame, loving without chains. Her words were fragile, hopeful, reckless. The elder listened in silence, knowing every word was a dagger drawn closer to their father's wrath. For Jonathan Wainwright was not blind. He noticed the light creeping back into his daughter's eyes, the way her silence softened into secret smiles, the way her steps carried a new rhythm. He had not yet discovered the letter, but he sensed betrayal brewing in the air. And betrayal, in his mind, was the greatest sin of all. One afternoon he summoned the younger sister to his study alone. The elder protested, insisting she remain with her, but Jonathan silenced her with a look that allowed no argument. The younger walked down the corridor, her steps slow, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew what awaited her, though she dared not name it. The door closed behind her, the heavy click echoing like the toll of a bell. Inside, the study was dark, the fire low, the air thick with the scent of brandy and smoke. Jonathan sat behind his desk, his eyes fixed on her, sharp and unyielding. He asked her questions, simple at first: how she spent her days, whom she spoke to, what she thought of their guests. His voice was calm, almost kind, but beneath it was a current of menace. He circled her like a predator, his words weaving tighter around her, pulling her toward confession. Her hands shook, her voice wavered, but she denied everything. She swore she had done nothing improper, that her heart belonged only to her family. Jonathan studied her closely, his silence more terrifying than his words. At last he leaned close, his breath hot against her ear, and whispered that he would always know if she lied. When she finally emerged from the study, her face was pale, her eyes hollow, as though she had left a part of herself behind. The elder caught her in her arms, demanding to know what had happened, but the younger only shook her head, unable to speak. That night, she lay awake, trembling, clutching the letter beneath her pillow like a shield against her father's shadow. The elder watched her sleep, her own mind unraveling with fear. She knew their father was circling closer, waiting for proof, for a single slip that would give him the excuse to crush the rebellion before it grew. Days later, another note came, slipped into her hand during a walk through the gardens. This time the young man wrote of escape, of a plan to meet beyond the walls, if only for a moment. He begged for her trust, for her courage, for a chance to show her that freedom was possible. The younger's heart soared, her hope blooming into resolve. She told her elder sister of the plan, her voice trembling with both terror and excitement. The elder pleaded with her to abandon it, to think of the danger, to remember their father's wrath. But the younger's eyes burned with a light the elder could not extinguish. She was tired of chains. She was tired of silence. She was ready to risk everything. On the night of the meeting, the younger slipped quietly from her chamber, her footsteps soft against the marble floors. The elder tried to stop her, clutching her arm with desperate strength, but the younger pulled free, whispering that she could not live like this any longer. She promised she would return, that she only needed to breathe air that did not reek of their father's control, if only for a moment. And then she was gone, disappearing into the night, her gown trailing like a ghost through the garden. The elder stood frozen in the doorway, torn between chasing her and protecting her by silence. Her heart pounded, her breath shallow, as fear gnawed at her bones. She knew their father was awake. She could feel it in the silence of the house, the way the air seemed to tighten, the way shadows seemed to stir. Jonathan Wainwright did not sleep easily, not when suspicion poisoned his mind. And if he discovered his daughter's absence tonight, the consequences would be more than either of them could endure. As the younger hurried through the garden, her eyes darted toward the gate where a figure waited in the shadows. It was him. The young man stepped forward, his hand outstretched, his face lit by the faint glow of the moon. In his presence, her fear melted into joy, and for the first time in years, she felt alive. She ran to him, her hand meeting his, her heart bursting with relief. For a moment it was real. Hope, love, freedom. But the estate was not blind. Somewhere within its walls, Jonathan Wainwright stirred, his instinct sharpening like knives. He rose from his chair, his eyes narrowing, his steps echoing down the corridors as he moved toward the darkness of the garden. The sister's fate teetered on the edge of disaster. The younger lost in the promise of love. The elder paralyzed by fear, and their father closing in like a storm that had waited too long to break. The night held its breath as the younger sister clung to the young man's hand beneath the shadow of the gate. His touch was warm, steady, filled with promises she had long forgotten the world could hold. For one fleeting instant, the chains of her father's house fell away, and she allowed herself to believe she could be free. The moonlight wrapped around them like a blessing, their whispered words trembling with urgency, their eyes reflecting a hunger for life denied too long. But beyond the silence, danger stirred. Inside the estate, Jonathan Wainwright moved with the patience of a predator. His instincts, honed by years of suspicion and control, told him something had shifted in the rhythm of his household. He walked through the halls with measured steps, his cane tapping softly against the polished floor, his breath deep and even. To anyone watching, he might have seemed calm, but beneath his skin raged the certainty that one of his daughters was slipping from his grasp. The thought alone ignited in him a fury that was cold and calculating, never reckless. Jonathan's wrath was a storm that built slowly, then destroyed completely. Back in the garden, the elder sister stood at the threshold of the house, her hands clutching the doorframe so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had not followed her younger sister, but her eyes strained against the darkness, her ears searching for any sign that disaster was about to fall. Every beat of her heart whispered that their father was coming, that the fragile moment of hope outside was already doomed. She wanted to scream, to run, to drag her sister back into the suffocating safety of the house, but she was frozen, trapped by the weight of terror. The younger spoke in hurried whispers, asking the young man if he truly meant his words, if escape was real, if he could protect her from the monster within her home. He answered with the desperation of a man who had glimpsed her suffering and could not bear it. He swore he would find a way, that she need only trust him, that her life was worth more than the gilded prison her father had built. She wept as she listened, not from sorrow but from the dangerous sweetness of hope. It was intoxicating. It was everything she had been denied. But hope had a price. The sound of a door closing, sharp and deliberate, shattered the fragile night. Both turned toward the house, the younger's face draining of color. She knew that sound. She had grown up in its shadow. Her father was awake. The young man gripped her hand tighter, urging her to run with him into the dark beyond the gate, to flee before it was too late. Her heart thundered with the pull of both worlds, the promise of freedom at her fingertips, and the iron grip of, her father tightening behind her. Jonathan emerged from the house, his figure tall and commanding in the moonlight. His gaze cut across the garden, landing on his daughter and the stranger who dared touch what belonged to him. He did not shout. He did not rush. Instead, he walked forward with the calm inevitability of death itself. His eyes glowed with a fury, contained a fury far more terrifying than rage unleashed. The young man stepped in front of the daughter, his body tense, ready to protect her. Jonathan's lips curved into the faintest smile, a smile colder than the night air, for he saw not a protector but a fool, a child playing at defiance. The younger sister's voice cracked as she begged her father to stop, to understand, to listen. Her words were desperate, trembling, yet Jonathan silenced her with a single gesture. His hand rose, and the world seemed to freeze. He spoke softly, almost kindly, telling her she had shamed him, that she had betrayed the blood that gave her life. His words carried no volume, yet they struck like blows. To Jonathan, betrayal was not just disobedience, it was treason, and treason demanded punishment. The young man stepped forward, defiant, insisting she deserved freedom, that she deserved love, that no father had the right to shackle his daughters in chains of fear. His voice shook, not from cowardice but from courage, a courage that had no place in Jonathan's world. Jonathan regarded him with contempt, his eyes narrowing. In that moment, the distance between generations, between power and helplessness, between cruelty and innocence, collapsed into silence. The elder sister, unable to remain still, rushed into the garden at last, her cries breaking through the night. She threw herself between her sister and her father, her body trembling with the force of her plea. She begged him not to hurt her, not to destroy what little hope they had left. She clung to her younger sister, shielding her, as though her body could stand against the storm that was Jonathan Wainwright. Jonathan's cane struck the ground with a sharp crack, and his voice rose at last, deep and resonant, filled with command. He declared that both his daughters belonged to him, body and soul, and that no outsider could ever hope to sever the bond he had forged with blood. His words dripped with venom, but behind them was something darker, something unspoken that made the sister's skin crawl. It was not love he demanded, nor loyalty. It was possession, absolute and unrelenting. The young man tried once more to pull the younger away, but Jonathan's hand moved faster than anyone expected. With a force that belied his years, he struck the young man across the face with the handle of his cane, the sound cracking through the night like thunder. The boy staggered, blood blooming across his cheek, but he did not fall. He stood, shaking, defiant still, though the fear in his eyes betrayed the truth. He had underestimated the monster he faced. The younger sister screamed, rushing to his side, her tears falling onto his skin as she tried to shield him. Jonathan's face remained a mask of calm fury, his eyes locked on the girl. He told her she was his, that no matter how far she ran, no matter who she turned to, his shadow would always follow. He promised her that love beyond his grasp was an illusion, that freedom was a lie, that the world would destroy her if he did not own her first. His words wrapped around her like chains, invisible but suffocating. The elder sister pulled the younger back, urging her to return to the house, to end the nightmare before it consumed them all. But the younger's heart was torn in two, the weight of her father's dominance crashing against the fragile promise of a life beyond him. Her sobs filled the garden, the young man's blood dripping into the soil, Jonathan's shadow looming, larger than ever. The night ended not with resolution but with silence. Jonathan turned back toward the house, his command clear. They were to follow him now without question. The young man was left behind, broken and bleeding at the gate, his future with her shattered in an instant. The sisters trailed after their father, their bodies trembling, their hearts crushed beneath the knowledge that even hope itself was forbidden. Inside the estate, the walls seemed to close tighter, the air heavier than before. The younger lay in her bed, silent tears carving rivers down her face, the memory of freedom now a wound too raw to bear. The elder sat beside her, holding her hand, her own mind filled with dread. For she knew their father was not finished. Tonight had only been a warning. The true punishment was still to come, and when it did, it would leave scars no love could heal. The house was silent after the confrontation in the garden, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a battlefield after the blood has dried, the silence of a storm gathering strength. The younger sister lay awake, her body stiff beneath the weight of her father's shadow. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his gaze, heard his voice, felt the invisible chains wrap tighter around her soul. The elder sat by her side, watching her, her own heart pounding with a dread that refused to quiet. She knew their father was plotting, that what he had done in the garden was not punishment, but prelude. Jonathan Wainwright never struck once when he could strike 100 times. He was patient, he was deliberate, and his vengeance always came, in ways that left scars deeper than wounds. The next morning, Jonathan summoned both sisters to the dining hall. The long table was set as though for a feast, silver-polished candles lit, crystal gleaming in the morning light. But the room was colder than any winter frost, for the master of the house sat at its head, his presence suffocating. He did not eat. He did not drink. He simply waited until his daughters stood before him, their heads bowed like prisoners awaiting judgment. His voice, when it came, was low and measured, but every word was a blade. He told them they had forgotten who they were, that they had been led astray by lies and weakness. He told them that only he could save them from the chaos of the outside world, that they belonged to him, not just by blood, but by bond. The younger sister trembled, her hands clutched before her as she tried to hold back tears. The elder stood firm, her eyes locked on the table, not daring to meet his gaze. They had heard his sermons before, but this one carried a new weight, a new finality. He spoke not as a father, but as a ruler, a judge, a god. He told them that love was poison, that freedom was a delusion, that no man beyond these walls could ever understand them the way he did. And then, in words that chilled them to their bones, he said that their only salvation was in him. Not in faith, not in future, not in family, but in him alone. The elder's breath caught, for she understood what he meant, though she had prayed, never to hear it spoken aloud. He did not simply want obedience, he did not simply want devotion. He wanted more, something darker, something forbidden, something that stripped away the very boundary between father and daughter. She reached for her sister's hand beneath the table, squeezing it tightly as though her grip alone could shield her from the meaning in their father's words. But Jonathan saw everything. He always did. His lips curved into a smile that was not a smile at all, and he told them they had no choice. The days that followed blurred into a haze of suffocating dread. Jonathan tightened his control, forbidding them from leaving their chambers without his permission, forbidding them from speaking to anyone else in the household. The servants moved through the halls in silence, their eyes averted, their fear palpable. They had seen the Master's wrath before. They knew what happened to those who defied him. Rumors spread like whispers through the cold corridors that the young man who had dared stand at the gate was gone, vanished into the night. Some said he had been driven out, others that he had been silenced forever. No one dared to ask. No one dared to speak his name. The younger sister's hope began to wither, her light dimming with each passing hour. She no longer spoke of freedom, no longer dreamed of escape. Instead, she stared at the walls of her chamber as though they were the bars of a cell. The elder tried to comfort her, tried to remind her that they still had each other. But her own strength was fading. Every word of defiance seemed hollow when measured against their father's power. He had taken their voices, their choices, their futures. And now, he threatened to take their very souls. One night, as the elder sat awake, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She knew them instantly, the slow, deliberate stride of Jonathan Wainwright. Her blood turned cold. The door creaked open, and he entered, his figure looming in the candlelight. He looked at them not as daughters but as possessions, his eyes dark with a hunger that had nothing to do with love. He spoke softly, telling them they had resisted long enough, that it was time to accept their place, that he would show them the truth of his bond. His words dripped with poison, his presence filling the room like smoke. The elder moved quickly, placing herself between him and her sister, her body trembling with fear, but burning with defiance. She told him he would not touch her, that she would never allow it. Jonathan's face darkened, but he did not raise his hand. Instead, he stepped closer, so close she could feel his breath, and whispered that she had no power, that every ounce of her strength was his to command. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm, and in that moment she realized he was no longer warning them. He was claiming them. The younger cried out, begging him to stop, her voice breaking in desperation. But Jonathan only turned his gaze on her, his eyes softening in a way that was more horrifying than anger. He told her she belonged to him, most of all that she could not hide behind her sister forever, that her resistance only proved her need for him. The elder pulled her close, her arms wrapped tightly around her, her body shaking with rage and terror. For the first time, she screamed at him, her voice cracking the silence of the estate. She told him he was a monster, that he had destroyed everything pure in their lives, that she would rather die than let him consume them. For a moment, silence followed. Jonathan's face was unreadable, his eyes burning with a fury too controlled to explode. Then he turned, slowly, and walked from the chamber, leaving the door open behind him. His departure was more terrifying than his presence, for it was not defeat, it was promise. He would return, and when he did, he would take what he believed was his. The sisters clung to each other in the dark, their tears mingling, their hearts pounding with fear. The elder whispered that they had to find a way out, that staying meant doom, that their father would destroy them both if they remained. But the younger shook her head, her voice broken, saying there was no escape, that he would always find them. Their voices faltered, their courage waned, but their bond remained. They were trapped in a nightmare, bound together by love and terror, knowing that the end was coming and that it would not be merciful. The estate slept in silence, but beneath its roof, the Wainwright sisters lay awake, waiting for the footsteps to return, waiting for the storm to break, waiting for the moment when Jonathan's shadow would consume them whole. Scene 7 complete. 1,500 words, escalating the tension toward the father's final claim. Do you want me to push forward into scene 8 now? Or should I pause and quickly map out how scenes 8 to 10 will deliver the climax and ending before writing them? You said, start scene 8. Now ChatGPT said, got it. I'll carry the story forward into scene 8 now. 1,500 words, same cinematic and chilling narration, continuous voiceover ready style. No headings. The estate was darker than ever, in the days after Jonathan's quiet threat. The sisters moved through their chambers like shadows, their lives reduced to whispers and silence, every moment weighed down by the knowledge of what he intended. The servants avoided their eyes, hurrying past as if afraid that even a glance might draw the master's fury upon them. The air itself seemed poisoned, heavy with dread, pressing against their lungs until it hurt to breathe. The elder sister could feel her resolve slipping. She had always been the protector, the one who stood between her sister and the storm, but even she could not deny the truth that loomed over them now. Jonathan had made his intent clear. His patience was gone. He would no longer wait for submission. He would take it, and when he did, he would leave them broken, their bond shattered, their souls enslaved to him forever. The thought of it gnawed at her, kept her awake night after night, her mind racing with desperate possibilities. The younger had grown quieter. Her spirit, once briefly rekindled by the promise of freedom, was dimming again, smothered beneath the weight of fear. She no longer spoke of escape, no longer dreamed aloud. She stared often at the window, her eyes distant, her hands trembling, in her lap as though she were already surrendering to fate. It broke the elder's heart to see her like this, to watch the light die slowly in her eyes. But worse than her despair was her silence, for it was a silence that sounded like acceptance. One evening, as the rain beat against the windows and thunder rolled across the sky, Jonathan summoned them again. They were brought to his study, a room that had always felt more like a courtroom than a sanctuary. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows across the walls. Jonathan sat at his desk, a glass of brandy in his hand, his eyes fixed on them with a gaze that stripped them bare. He did not speak at first, letting the silence grind against them until the weight was unbearable. Then, with a voice calm and certain, he told them the time for hesitation was over. He rose slowly, his cane tapping against the floor, and approached them. His words were soft, but each one struck like iron. They were his, they had always been his, and no force on earth could change that truth. He told them they were bound, to him not just by blood, but by destiny, that the world outside would never understand them, would never love them as he did. He reached for the younger, his hand hovering inches from her face, and for a moment she seemed too frozen to move. The elder threw herself forward, slapping his hand away, her voice breaking as she screamed that he would not touch her, that he was a monster, that they would never belong to him. For the first time, Jonathan's mask cracked. His eyes blazed with fury, his lips curling into a snarl as his cane lashed out, striking the elder across the shoulder with brutal force. She cried out, staggering back, pain radiating through her body, but she did not fall. She stood tall, trembling but unbroken, her eyes locked on his. She would not let him win. The younger sobbed, rushing to her sister's side, but Jonathan seized her arm, pulling her close with a grip like iron. His voice thundered through the room, declaring that resistance was useless, that every act of defiance only proved their need for his control. The elder clawed at him, screaming for him to release her, but he shoved her back with terrifying strength, sending her crashing against the desk. Papers scattered, a glass shattered, and the fire flared as if feeding on the chaos. For the first time, the younger fought back. Her hand struck against his chest, weak but desperate, her voice shaking as she begged him to let her go. Jonathan's eyes widened, not in pain, but in rage. He pulled her closer, his breath hot against her ear, hissing that she was his forever, that no one would ever take her away. The words slithered into her like poison, breaking her spirit. But before he could go further, the elder lunged again, striking him with all the force her trembling body could muster. The impact sent them, all sprawling, the room descending into chaos. The fire roared. The thunder outside rattled the windows, and in that moment, the estate itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of their struggle. The elder clawed and kicked, the younger sobbed and screamed, Jonathan's fury exploding into violence as he tried to pin them both beneath his will. It was not simply a fight for freedom, it was a fight for their souls, for their very humanity. At last, with a surge of desperate strength, the elder shoved him back into the desk. He crashed against it, the force toppling the brandy glass, flames licking up the scattered papers. The room filled with smoke, the crackle of fire mingling with the storm outside. Jonathan rose, his face a mask of rage illuminated by the blaze, and for the first time, the sisters saw him not as their father, but as the demon he had always been. His control was stripped away, his calm shattered, leaving only the raw hunger of a man who would rather destroy everything than lose what he believed was his. The sisters clung to each other, their tears and sweat mingling as they backed toward the door. Jonathan advanced, his silhouette monstrous in the glow of fire, his voice booming above the crackle of flames. He told them they could not escape him, that even if they fled the estate, his blood ran through their veins, binding them to him forever. His words rang with madness, with the conviction of a man who believed himself a god. The elder pulled her sister through the doorway, the smoke filling their lungs, the fire spreading faster with every heartbeat. Jonathan roared behind them, his voice chasing them down the corridor, promising that they would never be free. The sisters stumbled through the house, their feet pounding against the floor, their bodies trembling with terror and adrenaline. The walls groaned as the flames spread, the storm outside battering against the windows, the world itself seeming to conspire in their nightmare. They reached their chamber, slamming the door shut behind them, their breaths ragged, their bodies bruised. The younger collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, while the elder pressed her back against the door, her chest heaving, her mind racing. They had seen the truth now. There was no reasoning with him, no hope of safety within. These walls, if they remained, he would consume them. If they stayed, they would die, not in body, but in soul. The fire spread through the house, smoke curling beneath the door, the crackle growing louder, closer. Jonathan's footsteps echoed in the corridor, slow and deliberate, the footsteps of a predator who would not rest until his prey was caught. The elder pulled her sister to her feet, her voice breaking as she whispered that they had to run, that this was their only chance, that freedom was worth even death. The younger shook her head, her fear overwhelming. But the elder's grip was firm, her eyes blazing with determination. The storm raged outside, the fire raged within, and Jonathan's shadow loomed closer with every step. The sisters stood at the edge of their fate, their choice clear but impossible. To stay was to be consumed, to flee was to risk everything. And in the heart of the burning estate, they realized there was no longer a difference. Either way, the Wainwright legacy would end in fire and blood. The estate was an inferno, its walls shuddering as fire devoured the very foundations of the Wainwright legacy. Smoke filled the corridors, thick and suffocating, curling into every crevice like the fingers of some vengeful spirit. The storm outside lashed the windows, lightning illuminating the halls in violent flashes, as though the heavens themselves bore witness to the sins festering within these walls. The sisters clung to each other, stumbling through the haze, their lungs burning, their hearts pounding with terror and desperate resolve. Behind them, Jonathan Wainwright's voice cut through the chaos, deep and booming, carried not by volume but by sheer force of will. "You are mine," he roared, his words echoing over the crackle of flames. "No fire, no storm, no power on this earth can sever the bond I have forged with you." The elder dragged her younger sister down the corridor, her strength driven not by hope, but by desperation. Every step felt heavier, every breath more painful, but still she pushed forward. The younger's legs faltered, her body trembling, tears streaking through the soot on her face. She cried that they could not escape him, that he would never let. Them go. Her voice was filled with despair, her spirit nearly broken. But the elder tightened her grip, her voice harsh and commanding as she whispered that freedom was the only choice, even if it killed them. They burst into the great hall where flames licked at the high ceiling and smoke swirled like a living creature. The portraits of their ancestors glared down at them from the walls, their painted eyes seeming to condemn, to remind them of the cursed bloodline they carried. The firelight danced across Jonathan's face as he entered behind them, his figure monstrous in the glow. His clothes were torn, his hair damp with sweat, his cane gripped like a weapon. But it was his eyes that froze them, eyes ablaze with madness, with possession, with the certainty that he was not merely their father, but their master, their god. The elder placed herself between him and her sister, her arms spread wide, her body trembling but unyielding. She shouted that they were not his, that they would never be his, that whatever twisted bond he imagined was nothing but a curse. Her voice cracked, but her defiance burned brighter than the flames surrounding them. Jonathan's lips curled into a smile that was more terrifying than any snarl. He lifted his cane, pointing it at her like a blade, and declared that her rebellion only proved her devotion. The younger sobbed, begging both of them to stop, her voice breaking beneath the weight of terror. She fell to her knees, clutching her head, torn between the love she bore her sister and the chains of fear her father had wrapped around her since birth. Jonathan's gaze softened as he looked upon her, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. He told her she was his most precious jewel, that she was born to be his salvation, that the world outside would only destroy her. But in his arms, she would live forever. His words slithered into her ears like poison, and for a moment she seemed lost, her tears falling silently as though she were surrendering. The elder screamed, her fury tearing through the hall. She hurled a burning chair aside, the embers scattering, and lunged at him. Their bodies collided, the cane clattering to the floor, the flames casting their shadows high against the walls. Jonathan's strength was monstrous, his hands gripping, her arms with crushing force, but the elder fought with the wild desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose. She clawed at him, struck him, her cries mixing with the roar of the fire, her body shaking with rage. The younger watched, paralyzed, her body trembling as her sister struggled against the monster who had once been their father. She wanted to move, to fight, to save, but fear held her down like chains. Jonathan's voice bellowed through the hall as he overpowered the elder, forcing her to the ground, his hand pressing against her throat. He told her she could never defeat him, that she was bound to him forever, that even her hatred was proof of his dominion. The elder's eyes burned with fury as she gasped for air, her hands clawing at his arm. Something broke inside the younger then. Her sobs turned into a scream, raw and piercing, as she surged forward at last. She seized the fallen cane, its handle slick with sweat and ash, and with all the strength her trembling body could summon, she swung it down across Jonathan's back. The crack of wood against flesh echoed through the hall, and Jonathan staggered, his grip loosening for the first time. The elder coughed, gasping, scrambling free as her sister raised the cane again, her tears blinding her as she struck him once more. Jonathan roared, turning on her, his face twisted with rage and betrayal. For a moment, the mask of control shattered completely, revealing the raw madness beneath. He struck her across the face with his hand, sending her sprawling against the floor, the cane clattering away. The elder screamed her sister's name, crawling to her side, cradling her as blood trickled from her lip. Jonathan loomed over them, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with fury. The fire surged higher, devouring the curtains, the beams above groaning as the house began to collapse. Sparks rained down, smoke choking the air, but Jonathan moved forward still, unstoppable, relentless. He declared that if he could not have them, no one would. His voice was filled with certainty, the certainty of a man who would rather die in flames with his daughters than see them free of his grasp. The elder rose again, pulling her sister with her, their bodies bruised and broken but their bond unyielding. She whispered into her ear that this was the moment, that they had to fight, that they had to end it now, or they would never escape. The younger's eyes, filled with fear, flickered with something else, something brighter, something stronger. Together, they turned to face him, their hands clasped, their eyes locked on the monster who had ruled their lives for too long. The flames roared between them as father and daughters stood locked in a final confrontation. The storm outside howled, the house groaned, the portraits of their cursed lineage burned to ash above. Jonathan stepped forward, arms outstretched, his voice rising above the chaos as he declared they were his forever. But the sisters did not cower this time. They screamed back, their voices united, declaring they would never be his, not in life, not in death, not in eternity. The words cut through the air like blades, and for the first time, Jonathan faltered. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in disbelief, as though the bond he had forged through years of domination was unraveling in an instant. The flames surged around him, smoke curling against his skin, his face twisted with rage as he lunged forward. The sisters pulled back together, their grip tightening, their eyes blazing with defiance, and as the ceiling above gave way with a thunderous crash, the world itself seemed to choose sides. The world seemed to collapse in a single breath. The ceiling groaned like a dying beast, timbers cracking under the weight of centuries as fire raged with unholy hunger. Jonathan Wainwright stood amid the inferno, his shadow stretching long and monstrous against the walls as the sisters clung to each other, their bodies trembling but unbroken. The storm outside shrieked, wind and rain battering the manor, yet within, the fire held dominion, consuming everything in its path. Jonathan's eyes blazed with a fury that defied reason. His face contorted into something almost inhuman. He staggered forward through the flames, his arms outstretched as though to embrace them, to claim them one final time. His voice rose above the roar of destruction, a guttural cry that was equal parts command and lament. "You are mine," he bellowed, his words cracking like thunder. "You cannot escape me, not in this life, not in the next." The sisters backed away, their hands locked tightly together, their lungs burning with smoke. The elder's gaze was hard, her jaw clenched, her body trembling from exhaustion and pain, yet her eyes blazed with unyielding defiance. The younger, though weakened and broken, no longer bowed her head. Her tears had dried, leaving behind a face etched with sorrow and steel. Together, they stood as one, refusing to yield. The house groaned again, and with a thunderous crash, a beam fell between them and their father, the flames leaping higher in its wake. Jonathan roared, swiping at the fire as though it were a curtain he could tear down, his madness unshaken even as the inferno licked at his skin. He was consumed, body and soul, by the belief that his daughters were bound to him eternally. The elder pulled her sister toward the great doors at the far end of the hall, their last hope of escape. The heavy oak was already splintering under, the heat, the iron handles glowing red. They stumbled forward, choking, their bodies battered and bruised, each step a battle against both fire and memory. Behind them, Jonathan followed, relentless, his figure framed in fire, his voice echoing like a curse. Lightning split the sky outside, the storm illuminating the moment with blinding clarity. The sisters reached the door, the elder wrapping her hands in torn fabric before seizing the handles. She heaved with all her strength, the wood groaning as smoke poured around them. The younger pressed against her, adding her frail weight, her voice trembling with desperate prayers. The door shuddered, but did not give. Jonathan's footsteps drew closer, slow and deliberate, each one ringing like a drumbeat of doom. He whispered, Now his voice carrying even through the storm and fire, a chilling litany of devotion and possession. He promised that outside these walls lay only ruin, that they would never be safe, that the world would tear them apart. But in his embrace, they would live forever. His words slithered into their ears like they always had, but this time they did not bow. The elder screamed, her fury tearing through the smoke, and with one final desperate heave, the doors burst open. A blast of cold rain and howling wind rushed in, scattering embers, hissing against the flames. The storm outside was chaos, yet it was freedom. The sisters stumbled into the night, the rain soaking their clothes, their lungs seizing at the sudden rush of clean air. They collapsed onto the wet grass, coughing, trembling, but alive. Behind them, Jonathan's figure appeared in the doorway, framed by fire, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. The rain lashed against him, steam rising as drops met his burning skin, but still he stood, immovable. His voice rose one last time, a cry that shook the night. "You cannot leave me. You are mine until the end of time." The elder dragged her sister further into the garden, the cold mud clinging to their feet, the storm blinding them. They turned only once, and in that moment, the manor collapsed behind him. With a deafening roar, the roof caved, the walls crumbled, and fire consumed everything. The blast of heat knocked them to the ground, flames erupting skyward like the souls of the damned. Jonathan's silhouette disappeared into the inferno, swallowed whole by the house that had been both his kingdom and his prison. His voice echoed once more, faint and distant, before silence took him forever. The sisters lay in the rain, their bodies shaking, their breaths ragged. For a long time neither spoke, the storm raging above them, the fire burning itself out behind. At last, the younger turned to her sister, her eyes wide with disbelief. She whispered that it was over, that he was gone. But the elder, staring at the flames devouring their past, knew it was not so simple. The Wainwright name was ash now, the manor reduced to rubble, their father consumed by the fire he had ignited, yet the scars he left behind ran deeper than flesh. The younger wept softly, her body curled against her sister's, trembling as though afraid the world itself might turn against them. The elder held her tightly, whispering that they were free, though in her heart she felt the weight of his shadow lingering still. As dawn broke, the storm passed, leaving behind a sky streaked with grey and crimson. Smoke drifted over the smouldering ruins, rising into the pale light like a funeral pyre. The sisters rose on unsteady legs, their clothes drenched, their bodies broken, yet their bond unbroken. They stood hand in hand, watching the last embers of their cursed home fade into silence. The elder turned to her sister, her voice hoarse but steady. She told her they could not look back, that they must walk forward into the unknown, that whatever awaited them in the world beyond these walls, it could not be worse than the prison they had escaped. The younger nodded, her eyes filled with both fear and fragile hope. They walked together down the overgrown path, their figures small against the vast landscape, the rising sun casting long shadows at their feet. Behind them, the Wainwright legacy smoldered in ruin, its secrets buried beneath ash and flame. Ahead of them lay a future uncertain, haunted by memory but open, free, waiting to be written. And though Jonathan Wainwright was gone, his voice seemed to linger in the wind, a ghostly whisper that would never truly fade. The sisters did not speak of it, but in their hearts, they knew the truth. That escape was not an ending, but a beginning, and the scars of their father's possession would remain with them forever. Still, they walked on, hand in hand, their silhouettes fading into the light of morning, carrying both the weight of their past and the fragile promise of a future unshackled.